Welcome back to more Lamento. We have stopped at a decision with Rai, and we shall continue there. So last time we were talking about Toga and blah, blah, blah. Thank you, Mike, for not picking it up. About Toga and Sanga. I'm just gonna glare without saying anything. Anything he might have said to Rai was swallowed up by his irritation, so he just glared at him in silence. Rai furrowed his brow in slight annoyance.
さっきからいい加減にしろよ。誰も手助けなんて頼んでないし、一緒に行くとも言ってない。勝手に決めるな。なら、お前はどうしたいんだ?
Konoe fell silent, unable to think of a retort on the spot. Because of all the strange incidents that had happened to him, his mind was still blank. He stared down at his feet. Rai's gaze pierced him and he felt like just running away.
さっきの質問に答えろよ。そうしたら考える。いいだろう。まず、俺が野党に襲われた時、あんたは俺を逃がそうとした。なのに、今日は出会い頭いきなり仕掛けてきた。
True.
一体どういうつもりだ?
野党どもの時は気まぐれだ。雑魚を一掃したかった。ただそれだけだ。今日はお前の力を試した。どれほどの腕の持ち主かを。
Testing, sure. Sure.
力を試した。どうしてそんなことをする必要がある?
腕の立つやつなら楽しめる。もし大した腕もないのなら、いずれ野党か魔物に殺されて終わる。俺が先に切ったところでさほど違いはない。
I mean, well.
それじゃただの通り魔だ。
Yeah.
だろうな。そう呼ばれたところで、俺は一向に構わんな。
It's kind of funny, honestly. I read a small little review of Lamento earlier, actually, where someone was like, oh yeah, I love Asato and the other romanceable characters, but I don't really like Rai because he's so arrogant. And I have to agree, I think that is one of the reasons why I dislike Rai quite a lot, because I just cannot stand his arrogance. Like, he's a pretty boy, okay? He's a pretty boy, but his character, I just can't. It was also said that, like, usually with Rai's route and with the other romanceable characters' route, you get more story than with Asato, in the sense of background story and stuff. So, let's see. Technically, I plan to only do Asato's route, but we'll see where that goes. He felt disgusted at Rai's shameless words and uncaring attitude. So all that mattered was his own enjoyment and others were just playthings. Trying to keep his emotions in check, Konoe continued.
さっきのあの2匹は
同業者だ。商売敵とでも言うべきか。
商売敵。
ランセン付近の森に隠れ家を持つ賞金首の情報が流れている。他にも森に入ってきている奴がいるはずだ。賞金首を張っていたところでお前が現れた。
賞金首。
Oh, dang it. The world of turning one's strength into profit, huh? Even so, Konoe still didn't know why Rai wanted to test his strength. Wait a moment. Near Ransen? Konoe instinctively looked towards Rai.
ランセンはここから近いのか?
遠くはない。
What means not far?
道は?
Rai nodded. Konoe's ears twitched.
ランセンに行きたいのか?
ああ。
理由は?
living? When Konoe kept quiet, Rai gave him a condescending smirk.
聞くだけ聞いておいて、自分はだんまりか。
Yo!
勝手なのはどっちだ?
Nande. Rai's words spurred his irritation on again, but he had a point. Konoe pursed his lips and stifled his anger.
まあいい。結局どうするつもりだ? 一緒に行くのか行かないのか。はっきりしろ。
あんたはランセンへ行くのか?
ああ。一旦仕切り直す。
He couldn't stand Rai's attitude, and I only wanted Konoe to come along for his own gain. But if he stubbornly walked away from Rai, he'd probably just be stuck wandering around the forest again. It was too unpleasant to accept. If he was going to Ransen...
俺も行く。
Not a thought wasted on Asato. How rude. He looked at Rai with determined eyes. Rai fixed his eyes on Konoe for a few moments, then turned on his heel.
ついてこい。
Rai began to walk, and Konoe hurried after him, but then stopped. Remembering Asato, he looked back towards the forest. There, that's what I said, my dear boy. Was Asato safe? He was worried, but there was nothing to be done now. He couldn't start combing through the forest. In the end, he had no choice but to give up.
どうした?
Rai's voice decided for him. Konoe shook his head, then covered his head with his hood and started walking. There wasn't any other way. He could only pray that they would meet again somewhere. The moon of light started to sink little by little, coloring the sky with the colors of dusk. Konoe thought solemnly to himself as he walked. She was a sangha? It still didn't feel real. The one who supported the Toga with their song, deciding victory or defeat in battle, was he really such a being? With many unsatisfied thoughts inside his chest, Konoe proceeded through the vermilion forest with Rai. Rai, not Ray. Ugh. They had been walking for a while when the path covered in shrubs began to thin out. There was only a slight difference, but it seemed so fresh to Konoe, since the scenery up until now had been the same. For some reason, his heartbeat sped up. His steps became a little lighter, too. Before long, the entangled trees began to open up, and a colossal but distorted silhouette appeared before them.
あれがランセンの町だ。
あれが。
As Rai walked before him, Konoe's eyes sparkled in wonder. The city, catching the light of dusk and casting enormous shadows, looked like a monster. Constructed of inorganic material, the town had an odd-fashioned color and feel. Old. It was austere, and somewhat eerie. Oh damn it, I blew my nose and I got a nosebleed. Oh no. Oh no, okay. I'm just holding something on my nose now.
建物も歴史も知識もだ。だから示唆中の者がここに集まる。
Konoe had heard that Ransen was made from the remains of one of two Kane cities. Oh, I thought it would continue. Hehe. So this was it? As they drew closer, the town lay completely exposed. The first impression Konoe got was one of a mishmash of different buildings and beings. Everything coexisted inside this confusion. Okay, I gotta take care of my nosebleed real quick. One moment. Alright, I'm back. I just have a rolled up piece of paper in my nose now, and I hope that helps. The foreign nature of it all struck him the most. Little by little, more and more cats started coming in and going. After knowing nothing but Karo, he thought Ransen seemed like a formidable presence. Konoe became confused, unable to understand what was going on. Had anyone asked him to describe Ransen, he didn't think he would have been able to. Finally, they set a foot in the city. Yeah, seems like the bleeding has stopped. Woot. Oh, pretty. Konoe's mouth fell wide open as he looked around. All he could see was cats. He could see nothing but cats. It was so noisy. Rai looked over his shoulder at Konoe, his tail lightly swaying. Konoe followed as if he could not lose sight of that tail's white fur. It was the first time he'd ever seen so many cats, and he was honestly quite nervous. With so many eyes watching them, what if there was danger lurking? Konoe was seized with uneasiness at the thought, but he told himself that he was worrying too much. All the cats passed each other with that same sense of haste, and nobody seemed concerned about what was happening around them. What a strange place, Konoe thought as he looked at a row of homes along a city street. Stalls and colorful signboards of various street vendors occupied the narrow paths. The vendors called out to visitors in boisterous voices that hurt his ears. It was very lively. Lively? There were so many colors everywhere. Even so, the general atmosphere seemed so dark. Dead despite being so alive. It felt something like that. Still, seeing all of these rare sights made Konoe's heart leap, though he was careful not to stray from Rai. A sign over one of the stalls was decorated with large Ribikan letters. Weapons, fruits, medical herbs, and other things like clothing. Here, everything was within reach. Still, the place felt dead. It was a really eerie city. The muddy stream of noise that swirled around the city bothered him. He wondered if he could get used to it. Pop-pum. Amidst the hustle and bustle of the crowd, Konoe's ears made out a different sound. He could hear a tune coming from out of nowhere. His eyes searched around. At the side of the road, a shadow stood still between the other cats. Konoe realized that his legs had broken off into a run on their own. My favorite soundtrack. It was the poet. Sitting at the side of the road among a group of children, he strummed his lute. Konoe was about to talk to him when he stopped himself. The children were happily listening to the poet's song. The flowing, quiet melody gently tickled his ears. Both the poet and the children seemed to be in a completely different place. The poet spun words and sang, catching the light of dusk and scattering it to the earth. Small hands reached out. The children eagerly held out their hands and tried to grab the fragments of the song. Chasing after them, the children frolicked around with smiling faces. Frolicked? So many difficult words. The poet's voice wrapped around the children like a pale film. Konoe was charmed by this scene. He noticed that he was purring. His stiffened tail had relaxed. Even so, he didn't know if what he was seeing was reality or an illusion. But it was fine either way. This was a tender time of satisfaction. He was distributed by an arm reaching out from behind. Distributed, or was he distracted and I was just misreading? A hand covered his mouth. It pinned him and forcibly dragged him away. Off the main street was a dark hangout for drifters. It was a back alley. The cats that were there didn't seem to care about him. They only looked straight ahead. The hustle and bustle of the streets grew distant. Suddenly, at his side, Konoe heard wild breathing. Following it, sounds of lips being licked. As soon as he heard that, a chill ran down his spine. The cat who dragged Konoe ran his hand over his clothes and groped about his legs. That was when Konoe understood what the cat was aiming for. Gathering all of his strength, Konoe headbutted the cat behind him with all his might. At the cat's muffled groan, the powerful grip on his body was loosened at once. He immediately jumped away, then kicked his knee into the cat, who hunched over in pain. The cat coughed wetly and fell over. Konoe scowled at the cat, breathless himself, and immediately headed back towards the main street.
Oi.
Konoe turned at the voice. Weaving his way through the crowd of cats, Rai approached at a quick pace, his face stern.
何やってる？はぐれるなと言ったはずだ。
I mean, come on.
いや、
大方、裏路地に連れ込まれでもしたんだろう。
When Rai guessed right, Konoe reflexively looked up at him. In his blue eyes was a hint of irritation.
ここはカロや近隣の村とは違う。お前よりも体格のいい猫なんていくらでもいる。あまり無防備になるな。
Why you be like that? Konoe knew, but for some reason he became strangely annoyed and turned his face away with a sour look.
行くぞ。もうはぐれるなよ。次は知らん。
His way of speaking like a parent was becoming more and more annoying, but Rai had already begun to walk away. This would piss me off, really. While following after Rai, Konoe looked at the area where the poet sat before. The children were gone, as was he. Had it been all an illusion? Konoe shook his head as if to clear his thoughts. He hurried on ahead, not wanting to lose sight of Rai. Mixed with the street stalls that were lined up, Konoe occasionally saw buildings made of strange material, probably remains from the toucans. He could not feel much of a temperature on the grey surface. As they passed, Konoe wished he could go inside. Ugh. They had been walking for a while when they stopped and stood in front of one of the buildings. It wasn't a remnant of toucans, it was just a normal building. On a signboard tied up high above them, the letters simply declared, "In."
入るぞ。
Rai pushed open the door and entered the building. As soon as they entered, Konoe saw a reception desk, but no one was behind the counter. It felt like a waiting room for the reception of guests, decorated with a small but comfortable sofa and a set of 2 tables. Behind it were stairs that led to a 2nd floor. The inn didn't seem very large. Rai approached the reception desk. On the counter were a book and some papers with various notes. Just stepped out. The rate is on the deferred payment system. Those who desire lodging choose an unoccupied room from the book and sign in.
随分ふざけた宿だな。
Indeed.
他へ行くか。
いや、いい。この方がかえって気楽だ。
Rai furrowed his brows and opened up the roaming book. Randomly almost choked, okay. There were small plates of vermilion ink placed close by. He dipped his fingertip in the ink and pressed it to one of the empty rooms.
行くぞ。
Rai headed towards the stairs. Konoe was about to follow him when he stopped. He heard a sound from the entrance. Was it just his imagination? He tried scooping out his surroundings. The sound got louder. The front door shook. It startled him and his tail bristled a bit. Watching the door intendedly as if someone was about to bust in and eat him, Konoe heard a muffled voice.
おい、誰かいないか。ここ開けてくれると助かるんだが。手がいっぱいでどうにもならん。
Would you look at that? I do think this might be our very last romanceable interest. Is it him? The door rattled. Not able to simply disregard it, Konoe had no choice but to approach the door. Making sure that his hood was low over his eyes, Konoe cautiously opened the door.
ああ、悪いな。助かった。
It is him. At the sound of the fatigued voice, something was set down with a thud next to Konoe. It was a huge package wrapped in cloth. Konoe looked up timidly at the tall, broad-shouldered cat who now stood before him.
なんだよ。ゲンさんじゃなかったのか。
The cat blinked his eyes in surprise. His ears were round and the fur on his tail was golden with black stripes. Konoe wondered if this cat and Rai were from the same clan of large breeds. He was probably much older than Konoe.
ゲンさん？
うちのお得意さんだよ。それよりあんたはなんだ？泊まりに来たのか？
そうだけど。
そうかい。
At his easy reply, Konoe felt kind of disappointed. This guy was probably the inn's owner, but he didn't behave very much like it.
あんた、ずいぶん厚着してるな。確かにもうじき冬だが、まだそこまでするほど寒くはないだろう。おまけに無口ときたもんだ。
I mean, yeah. Konoe was offended by his slightly condescending words. However, the cat didn't seem too concerned about Konoe one way or another, and totally tilted his head warily.
なあ、挨拶が遅れたな。俺はバルド。ここの宿やってるもんだ。こじんまりとしたところだし、大したもてなしもできんが、まあ居心地は悪くない。好きなだけ伸びてってくれ。
Thank you.
冬の祭りが近いからな。宿も混み合ってくる時期だ。あんた、冬の祭りには出たことあるか？
I don't know. Konoe shook his head.
一度見た方がいいぞ。春と違って華やかじゃないんだが、見応えのある代物だ。
No one cares what you prefer. Konoe was about to speak those words, but he held his tongue.
祭りまでもうすぐだし、それまで泊まっていったらどうだ？ そうだ。それからな。
As he chattered away just to chatter, Bardo raised his eyebrows as though he just remembered something. Suddenly his gaze fell to Konoe.
ちょっと頼み事をしてもいいか。客と宿屋の中ってこと
We just arrived! Do you usually ask your guests for favors? Konoe passed the point of being cranky and was now descending into a downright foul mood. Did all the Ransen cats act like this? I'm gonna be nice, though I'm gonna hear him out. Konoe felt like Bada was being overly friendly with him, but it didn't seem wise to deny his request and make an enemy.
とりあえず話だけなら
I swear I'm so afraid to blow my nose again right now because I don't want it to start bleeding again.
いや、何、簡単なことさ。ちょいと店番を頼まれてほしいんだ。
Okay, I hope it doesn't start bleeding right now. Don't want to repeat.
店番
Sure. Let me just work there unpaid.
俺はここに荷物を置きに戻ってきただけでな。買い出しのためにこれからちょいと遠くへ出なきゃならない。一応代わりの店番が来ることになってるんだが、まだ来てない。長い間受付不在ってのも穏やかじゃないだろ。代わりのやつが来るまででいい。
The other guy.
いつ来るんだ
もうそろそろ来なきゃおかしいな。
Soon.
指定した時間はとっくに過ぎてる。どうだ
Bottle said with an ounce of shame. Without, sorry. As if he had the gall to put things off on others. This guy had some nerve.
ああ、まあ断るって言うんなら別にいいぞ。他の宿に行ってもらっても。
He continued lightly. It was as if he sympathized with Konoe.
空いてるかどうか知らんが。
Vacancies. Well,
あんたな
Bardo grinned words! Provocative, provoking, you know the word. You can read it. The guy.
客を脅すつもりかよ
俺はどっちでもいいって言ってるだけだ。選ぶのはそっちだろ。
Ah? Help. Though his anger began to boil, Konoe made sure to keep his composure. If he declined Bartle's request and looked for another inn, it couldn't be guaranteed that he'd find a place to stay.
わかった
どうも。
Bardo smiled at him. It was like a smile of triumph, and Konoe felt a pang of bitter defeat.
何すればいいんだ店番って
受付に客が来たら宿泊帳に名前を書いてくれって言えばいい。あんた名前は
この絵
この絵か。俺が戻ってきた時にまだいるようなら飯を振る舞ってやるよ。うちのは結構評判がいい。
Okay, I guess I can take a meal.
そんなのいい別に
それじゃ任せた。
Waving one hand, Bardo left the inn. It felt as if a storm just passed. Once Bardo was gone, Konoe stared at the door, feeling strangely empty. Konoe realized that he was completely dragged into Bardo's hectic pace. In short, He had been used. Konoe glanced at the counter and began to feel increasingly irritated. There was no reason to be forced to respond, or to make a promise at an inn he had only entered by chance. I'm such an idiot. Konoe reluctantly went behind the counter and sat on the stool. He didn't like breaking promises. Covering his head with the hood of his cloak, he must have looked like the creepiest receptionist in town. That substitute had better come soon. Unable to stand it, Konoe dropped his shoulders. Then he heard footsteps coming down the stairs. Konoe looked down reflexively, not wanting to be seen by other cats.
Oi.
Rai? Konoe looked up at the familiar voice. Look at his fluffy tail. Cute. Rai stood in front of the counter.
そんなところで何をしている?
Disbelief colored his voice.
ちょっと頼まれて。
誰に?
ここの主人。
そいつはどうした?
用事があるとかで出て行った。
まったく。
The look in his eyes saying it all. Rai turned away and sighed.
バカ猫だな。お前もここの主人も。
Please count yourself in too, because you're also stupid. He couldn't respond. In fact, Konoe was inclined to agree. Rai coldly narrowed his eyes at Konoe.
苦虫を噛みつぶしたような顔だな。
そんなに変かよ。
変だ。
I'm trying to... What is this? Is this the chair? Oh no, these are his knees. He's sitting like in... Not really cross-legged, but like in a weird way. Konoe, that can't be comfortable. As if he wasn't feeling bad enough already. When the substitute receptionist finally arrived, Konoe left the desk. It had only been a little while, but he was still exceptionally tired and finally headed for the room. And there was only one bed. Would be funny. It was a room made for two, without any special features. There were two beds, a small table, a chair, and not much else. On the shelf stood a lamp, and in the corner of the room there was a barrel of water. It seemed there was a separate room for sanitary purposes, because in the corner of the second-floor hall there was a door with a small picture of a sand pile hung on it. Okay, that's kinda cute. Konoe opened the window. It was nighttime, but the streets were as lively as ever, and light flickered in the stalls of the street vendors. Konoe let out a small sigh. He could finally relax. Rai was checking the wound from where Konoe slashed him.
大したことはないな。お前のも見せてみろ。
Why should I?
俺はいい。
Konoe immediately stopped Rai's hand from pulling off his coat and shook his head. Though he knew about his ears and tail, Rai hadn't seen the marks on his body. Even though he might see them sooner or later, Konoe still hesitated. Konoe looked down, his ears lying flat. Rai seemed unconvinced.
なんだ? いいから見せろ。
Ayo. Rai took a long stride forward and seized his arm.
やだ!
Konoe instinctively drew his claws. The momentum flung his hood off. A red scratch ran over Rai's cheek, and Konoe stared at him with wide eyes. He hadn't meant to do that. Rai wiped his cheeks silently and regarded the blood on his hand.
二度も同じ奴に傷をつけられるとはな。
His voice was indifferent. There was no anger or bloodlust. It was cold, just like that blue eye of his. Konoe clenched his hands into fists, looked down, and bit his lip.
何がそんなに気にかかる？
Plenty of things.
その耳と尾か。黒が不吉だとしても、お前の隠し方は尋常じゃない。一人で森を抜けようとしていたところを見ると。
Even if their eyes did not meet, he knew where I was looking. Konoe could not keep hiding it. Maybe he was overthinking it. Now was as good a time as any. Just do it. As any. Ugh. At his resolution, Konoe raised his face. With his stiff fingers, he took off his coat. He took off his gauntlets and shoes as well. Rai's blue eye narrowed slightly.
それは。
Even when Konoe looked at them again himself, the markings on his skin appeared ominously grotesque. In the flickering lamp's flame, they seemed ready to come alive at any moment. With a sense of regret rising up, Konoe averted his eyes from Rai. What was Rai thinking right now? Wondering about it made Konoe want to run away. However, Rai only took hold of Konoe's arm to carefully study the markings.
昔からなのか。
違う。突然こうなった。耳と尾も。
黒いあざ、耳と尾。伝えられし呪われた印か。
The muttered words made Konoe's heart ache. So he drew back his arm from Rai's grasp.
カロを出たのはそのせいか。乱戦を目指していたということは。
Oh. Konoe nodded slowly.
村にはいられなかった。だから、乱戦へ向かうしかなかった。
そうか。
Rai folded his arms and leaned against the wall.
呪いをかけられたからには解く方法もあるんだろうな。
え？
Why is his upper body so long? Konoe looked at Rai. His profile was lit by the glow of the lamp, softening his sharp features, but his eye was as piercing as ever.
可能性が全くないわけではない。違うか。
そうかもしれない。けど、だったら何だって言うんだ。
可能性があるのなら探せばいい。むざむざ呪い殺されるつもりはないんだろ。
何が言いたいんだ。
今お前が聞いた通りだ。それとも探すのは面倒だとでも言い出す気か。
だから。
This one-sided conversation was making him more and more irritated. Caught in the moment, he had raised his voice and his tail bristled on end. Konoe scowled at Rai as if to challenge him.
可能性を探ればいいと言っている。
そんなことわざわざ言われなくても分かってる。とっとと探しにでも出ろってことか。
Rai stared at Konoe in silence and blinked slowly.
お前、本当にバカな猫だな。
なんだと。
俺はお前に来いと言った。お前は同意した。だからここにいるんだろう。なのに、どうして今さらお前一人を放り出す必要がある。
Maybe because you're silly? A strangely lifeless sigh spilled past Konoe's lips.
あんたも俺の呪いを解く方法を探すっていうのか。
当たり前だ。
Oh.
どうして。
お前はサンガだ。育てると言っただろう。
So like, give and take, huh?
世界に災いをもたらすと言われている呪いと同じでもか。
I mean...
だからどうした。お前に触れた途端、 消し飛ぶとでも言うのなら話は別だがな。
True.
そこまでしてサンガが欲しいのかよ。
欲しくないとは言わん。俺には力が必要だ。だがその前にたかだか呪いごとき騒ぐことでもないだろう。
Sounds like a fair deal, kinda. Konoe was astonished. Not another word was spoken. First, this haughty cat before his eyes seemed unlikely to act for the sake of someone else. Then he'd spoken of his actions as when, not if. Rai was unlike any cat that Konoe had met so far.
どうした？
いや、変わってるよな、あんた。普通は気味悪がって近寄らないだろ。
上辺だけで全てを判断することが普通か？所詮そういう奴らが気にするのは周りの目だ。他と違うことをして弾かれ疎まれるのが怖いだけだ。
I mean, he's right. If you're part of the majority, you aren't the one hurt by everyone's rejection. I mean, that's pretty accurate, not gonna lie. As he finished speaking, Konoe was overwhelmed. It felt like all the disgust and anger he felt towards Rai had faded. He was arrogant, but Konoe could trust Rai more than he could trust the other cats anyway.
傷を見せろ。
Konoe was still confused, but this time he obediently showed his arm. The blood of the wound had immediately dried, and was already beginning to scab. His skin had begun to regain some elasticity, and the pain wasn't too bad anymore.
この分なら大丈夫だな。
With a nod, I let go of his hand.
ひとまず今日は体を休めろ。これからのことは明日考える。
Konoe sat down on the side of the bed. His eyes turned to the window. He had finally reached Ransen. Seeing Sisa's largest city filled him with wonder. Konoe sighed deeply, feeling fatigue spread throughout his body. Taking off the bag he was carrying on his back, he pulled out a wooden flask and drank some water. As Konoe did this absent-mindedly, Rai approached his side. He seemed to be asking for something with his eye. While Konoe wondered what was on his mind, Rai suddenly grabbed his tail. Rude. The tail was Ribika's weak point. A painful, unexpected shock ran through his body. Reflexively, he stiffened up and bared his fangs. Rai glanced at Konoe for a moment, then gazed intently at his black tail. He ruffled the tail's fur, and Konoe felt a chill run down his spine. You don't say! Since Rai was expressionless, it was hard to know, but his eye remained fixated on Konoe's tail. Konoe became embarrassed and forcibly swiped the tail from Rai's hand. Do you tell that to everybody? You told that to Asato too, didn't you? Is that how to flirt? Tell them that they have a nice tail? When he spat out those words and turned his face away, he saw Rai's large white tail sway slowly. That was the end of their conversation. The only sound in the room was the noise of the city crowd coming in through the window. Rai sat down on the side of the bed by the window in silence, and in a manner that could only be called elegant, he began to groom himself. What the hell? After staring at Rai for a moment without knowing why, Konoe pulled himself together and fished for something in his flax bag. He thought that it was unusual for him to spend time in a room with another cat. That, and he'd only just met Rai. For some reason, he couldn't settle down. Konoe dragged over the bag he'd gotten from his parents. Then he pulled out and opened the letter on which his father's song was written. No matter how many times he looked at the letters, he couldn't read them. Still, just looking at it was fine. He remembered his home in Karo, though not that much time had passed. Konoe already missed it. Then he suddenly remembered something. A ring. And that was right, the ring. It was a precious item from his parents, but Konoe had not put it in his bag. It was still on the shelf in his house. And now there was no way to get back and get it. No matter the reason, Konoe couldn't return. Could he really do nothing but give up? He could think of no other options. Deeply regretting this, he lay down in disappointment. Konoe's gaze panned to the bed next to him. Rai was looking out of the window. Occasionally, the tip of his white tail twitched gently. Konoe supposed he wasn't the only one who couldn't settle down. Konoe curled into a ball under his blankets. Oh, that's what I do. With a rustling sound, he began to groom. When he shut the world out from himself like this, he felt a bit of relief. His body temperature warmed up the blankets comfortably. Little by little, he felt sleep creeping in. While still in the middle of grooming his tail, Konoe softly drifted off to sleep. I think this is a very good point to stop right here.